Hi, I'm Garm1, and I'm here today with Parker Blau from Black Hat Games. How's it going?
Going well. How are you?
I'm pretty well, and you're here today to talk to us about Mud, Blood, and Glory, right?
I am. Should I tell you a little bit about the game?
Heck yeah.
Yeah, so it's Mud, Blood, and Glory. It is a Wild West tabletop RPG set in the 1880s, where the players get to play as all of the outlaws and cowboys, any sort of thing like that that they can imagine. Um, and they essentially just get to be the bad guys for a little bit, which is pretty cool. And the whole system is designed for like new players to get into tabletops, and for experienced players to still be able to show up and have a good time. And it also, the game system can grow with the players as they get more experienced and more comfortable with the game. They can start adding in advanced rule sets and things like that that can challenge them and make them more familiar with advanced game systems. And then they can move on to Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons or the Star Wars system or whatever. Um, or they can keep playing Mud, Blood, and Glory because it's a great game.
So the setting is just like the fairly standard real world 1880s California, I
Yeah.
assume.
No, it's actually, across the Western United States, we've got, rules for like going into other countries if you want to take it into Canada or Mexico or down into South America. And we chose the 1880s because it was this moment, first of all, it had just enough technology that players can really kind of still feel familiar with it. There's not like flintlock guns and muzzle loading rifles and stuff like that. There's still the cowboy revolvers and lever action guns that they see everywhere. And there's trains that are, the railroad is taking over the frontier and stuff like that. But then there's still a little bit of wild left. There's still the New Mexico territory and the Oklahoma territory and Montana and things like that just aren't settled at this point. But it is absolutely grounded in the real world. We have a stretch goal to add in some like Bigfoot and Sasquatch and Chupacabra and stuff. But the core of the game is absolutely real world
Heck yeah.
uh, historical gameplay.
If you want to take it into Canada, that's only like 10 years after an insurrection movement up here, so
Well, yeah. So I mean, it's ripe for a lot of political upheaval and stuff like that, and especially going into like South and Central America as well. The players can go explore that kind of thing, and I think more experienced game masters can weave that into their games. But the inexperienced game master can show up and just play, you know, cowboys, and that still works. The game will work no matter how complex you want to make it.
yeah. Just like go watch The Searchers and then run that plot.
Right, and that's what we say in the first few pages of the handbook. We say like go watch Magnificent Seven, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly to get that feeling about like what. And to be fair, those movies are kind of a made up version of the Wild West. It was a lot harsher and a lot worse for many people. Um, but the game can still be fun. We can still have it like a cowboy movie, and you get to be that outlaw, the nameless outlaw who drifts into town, robs a bank, and then rides out. And I think players rarely get to be the bad guy in tabletop games.
Yeah.
So
It depends on the setting. You mentioned Star
that's
Wars.
true.
You mentioned
Yeah,
Star Wars, which is a great lead-in actually with all of the Western influences in at least the original trilogy.
yeah. I mean, that's I think my first exposure to kind of the cowboy image is Han Solo, right? And him in his Millennium Falcon. I think that's a good example of kind of that cowboy imagery being pervasive throughout Western media, or at least American media, I should say.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, it's certainly not sci-fi. Ours isn't. But if you want to get into Star Wars, I mean, I know that I went into the Star Wars tabletop, and I didn't like all the rules and all of the complex systems and stuff like that. And had I not known someone who already knew it, I would never have gotten to play the game. And so this game is designed to be like it doesn't matter if you don't know anybody who plays it. You can sit down and play with friends. It's accessible that way.
was that the FFG one, the newest one, or old Star Wars Saga
Um,
edition?
oh, I don't remember which version we were playing. Um, I'm not that well versed in the Star Wars tabletop. I realize.
That's all right.
Um, I think it was the FFG one. It must. I mean, it seemed newer.
Yeah,
I'll
if it was
say.
in the if it did it use weird like custom dice?
Oh God, the proprietary dice.
Yes,
Yes.
that would be the
Yeah.
FFG one then.
Yeah. Then it was that one.
I haven't had a chance to try that yet. We are this weekend actually, conveniently, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. I mean, good luck with it.
Yeah, well, we did Star Wars Saga edition for like a year. It's brutal. it's 3.5 with more rules on top of it.
Yeah, that's too much for me. And then that's, I mean, if I can, talk more about Mud, Blood, and Glory, that's the whole
Absolutely.
point of the system is to get away from more rules. It's all about, because every tabletop I've played with every group I've played has been, oh, we don't really like this rule. Let's just kind of forget about it or push it to the side. Um, and so what ends up happening is that either breaks the game or it makes you homebrew rules or just kind of make something up. And so Mudblood and Glory embraces that yeah, you don't have to play with every rule in the book. You play with whatever rules you like and whatever are going to make you have fun. Because at the end of the day, if you're laughing and having a good time with friends, that's been a successful game, right? So the whole game system is designed to be able to add and remove rules as you like them. So
Yeah, without breaking too many things in the process, hopefully, yeah.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't break any of them actually, which is the cool part. So if you have a player who's brand new and they're like, man, I don't want to do the wilderness survival part. That seems too tough for me. I don't want to have to worry about rations and weather and sleeping and stuff like that. Then say, great, we can just role play that part of it. And then back when we get into combat, we can use whatever rules you like and, that kind of thing. So yeah, the game won't break if you forget a rule or skip a rule or say this rule is stupid because that's totally fine.
And that's very much the tabletop game spirit. I can't remember.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
and
everybody
it
sits down and says that. So
yeah, and it allows you to customize it to the campaign that you want to run specifically. If you want to
exactly.
run something that's heavy on the wilderness survival rules, but not so heavy on the combat, you focus a ton on the wilderness survival rules and just cut the combat down to the bare minimum.
Exactly. And so that's the whole, I mean, that is the whole theory behind Mud, Blood, and Glory, is that the every advanced rule set can work with each other or work on their own, or you can just go full bore and take everything all at once. So
Well, that's pretty cool. Um, I have a tough question.
sure.
The 1880s were not exactly a happy time for a lot of people. A lot of
Right.
very bad things happened at the time. A lot of part of the reason that the Western genre is less popular now is because it's hard to do something in that time period without really talking about that. Like the Searchers gets into it, but
Right. Yeah.
how
I
do
mean,
you?
you open a can of worms when you talk about, frankly, any real world situation,
Mhm.
historical or contemporary. You as soon as it's not fantasy, you start to recognize plenty of groups of people who are marginalized or disenfranchised or just outright treated terribly.
Genocided?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, and then that's not something we try to avoid. We don't say, well, there's a reason we don't use the phrase like cowboys and Indians with the game because that perpetuates that really terrible narrative that has been crafted over the years by Western media. And we talk about that in the game. One of the first paragraphs you'll see in the introduction, actually, it's the last paragraph of the introduction, right before you get into the main game, says like just because this game is set in the 1880s doesn't give you license to act like it's the 1880s. You should still behave like it is a modern era and that there's real people here. And at the same time, it is an imagined fantastical game, right? It's the theater of the mind. You can make up any character you want. So why would you play a horrible person? You might as well a horrible. You get to be an outlaw and rob banks, but you shouldn't. Perpetuate genocide.
Yeah,
Um,
I get you.
yeah, and so there's a knowing that like if it is fantasy, then we can play anybody we want. Then let's play people who aren't horrible. I guess is a way of thinking of it, and that's what we've done in the game. And you have the opportunity to be an indigenous person or be a person from a different country of any type. We embrace knowing all the different languages and interacting with all those different groups in the game. And we encourage players to, if they want to learn, if they want their character to know or learn an indigenous language, to use something like Native Land, which is an app, or do some research to find what indigenous peoples did live on that land and originally lived there and what languages they spoke and what culture they were like and use it as an opportunity to learn more about those people who have been so marginalized by current storylines and actually grow from that instead of just perpetuating it.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that's a consideration in the design of the game. I
I
grew
mean, it
up.
was one of the first things that came up is like, yeah, it'd be really cool to play Cowboys and Outlaws, but as soon as you say that, if you know any history at all, it becomes, oh man, there's a whole group of people who weren't, allowed to be in that group. Um, so
A
yeah,
whole
it's
lot of
it's
them,
been a
yeah.
consideration of ours since the beginning.
Yeah, I grew up beside a reservation, so obviously this is kind of it's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, an important thing to address. Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, the only lead-in that I have to follow that up is incredibly inappropriately, like tonally jarring. Um, but anyway, so 18 the 1860s to the 1880s. That's right around the time of the Meiji Restoration. There were still samurai in Japan. Can you play a samurai?
You could. I mean, we had characters. Some of our playtesters played, immigrants from China who, they were first working on the rail and then they joined the group. So, yeah, you could absolutely play a samurai. We have blades and knives that you can go and use, and that's actually where the cowboy narrative comes from, right? Is from samurai narratives, and so. Yeah, you could absolutely, and that's the freedom of the character creation in this. I know a lot of other games like to have classes and races and you're this certain thing, so you're always going to be that. Whereas I've found that characters, good characters at least, evolve over the time of your playing them. Right, the character that you start at level 1 hopefully isn't the exact same personality as you're playing at level 10. Otherwise, you haven't really role played a character. Who goes through 10 levels of becoming that powerful and acts the exact same? And so Mudblood and Glory embraces your character is not set from the start. You're not always going to be a mage or a cleric or a paladin or whatever. You are just a drifter, and it's up to your actions and your choices to define who you are, both for your own character and in terms of your slot in the group. I know a lot of groups that like to say, well, we've got our medic and we've got our gunslinger, and then you're going to be our heavy or tank, so you got to be DPS or something.
Yeah.
I like to see, and what I've seen from playtesting of Mudblood and Glory is that people end up taking up those spots. Someone just naturally says, "Oh, well, we need someone who can do healing. I'll take the surgeon ability," but they never have to set that as like their structured character. And so, yeah, if you want to play a samurai, absolutely, all you have to do is say, "Hey, I'm a samurai, and I'm going to focus in blades, and this is what my character is going to be like." And the game totally embraces that because you can make any character that can come to mind.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. The late 1800s were a really bizarre time.
Yeah, a collision of technology and wilderness, kind of.
Yeah, and like, yeah, there was a lot going on. If you really zoom out and take a look at like everything that was going on concurrently, it's
Yeah,
there's a lot.
yeah,
Uh, back to like hard topics. Um,
sure.
a lot of these cowboys and outlaws and stuff were probably ex-Confederate given the time. Do you talk about
Um,
that?
I mean, to my historical knowledge, not entirely true. I mean, this is to my limited knowledge of, I don't think people wrote down like, hey, by the way, I'm an ex-Confederate soldier and now I'm a cowboy.
Yeah,
Um, what I do know is that the West was an opportunity. It was a land of opportunity for folks of all types. Historically, 1 in 4 cowboys was African American. You had people who only spoke Spanish, who only spoke Russian, who only spoke an indigenous language, and they were operating right alongside people who only spoke French, who only spoke English, who only spoke German. So it was a collision of a bunch of different cultures. And again, I think if you're the type of player who wants to sit down and actually decide that you want to be a Confederate soldier, I don't want you playing my game, frankly. Um, I want people who are sitting down to have fun and then play a character that isn't defined by some historical event that happened 30 years before the or 20 years before the events of the game, kind of thing. Um, and someone who just isn't a jerk in that way. I mean, I'm fine with you robbing a bank or holding up a stagecoach, whatever, but come on, you don't need to be an ex-Confederate soldier to be that. So, I mean, that's my answer to that. I don't know if that's what you were looking for.
oh no, that's perfectly fine, man. Because I know this has come up in some other stuff. My group has tried to do. we were talking about the John Carter RPG, and
I'm unfamiliar with that.
uh the series or like the game itself.
I know the series a little bit. He's a soldier, Civil War soldier that gets transported to Mars, I think.
Yeah, and
Vaguely, yeah.
it's a funky like science fantasy thing. The Disney movie of it was actually pretty all right.
Oh, well then I should look it up.
Yeah, it's just called John Carter because their marketing department sucks. I guess I don't know.
Subtitles are so last year, I guess, for them.
I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, and John Carter himself is a ex-Confederate soldier. And it's the reason that he's out like do it like being an outlaw generally. Because he's kind of a dick. And a lot of my players were uncomfortable with having a major character in the setting who was an ex-Confederate. Like,
Yeah, I applaud characters or players who will voice that. Because I think being an outlaw, I studied criminology in college, and we talk a lot about, what makes a rule breaker or a law breaker versus someone who's, a law-abiding citizen. And I think a lot of people break laws all the time. It's just which laws do we care about breaking, and there's a lot of social definitions there. And I think that if you're going to play an outlaw in this game, which I think most people are, you don't have to be a horrible person at heart. You could just not live within the confines of law-abiding society, right? If you were an indigenous person who refused to live on a reservation in the 1880s, you were technically an outlaw. But are you actually a bad person? You're far from it, right? And so you can create a character like that who is, a Robin Hood type, or just a person who doesn't live by the legal confines of the U.S. federal system.
it's the difference between lawful and good. Yeah.
Right, right. So yeah, if we go back to the D&D alignment chart, yeah, it's all of the avoiding all the lawful stuff, going just chaotic is really what I wanted from this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you probably have your own moral code. At least a couple of people in the party, probably not all of them.
Yeah,
But
and I think that also, if for players, again, this game is heavily focused on like role playing and developing your character, because well, I'll get back to why we designed it that way, but it lets players grapple with that, and grapple with, like, what does it mean to, rob a stagecoach, but defend someone who's being robbed, or at later, on the road. Is it okay to rob an established bank but not the individual in the bank, kind of thing? So, it lets players explore that on their own, and my hope is that they're generally good people who come out with the right ethics on the other side. I hope nobody uses this game to exercise any sort of fantasy about anything horrible. Although I think that's used by every game out there. Someone uses it in a incorrect way. So
yeah, or at least an unsavory way.
yeah, exactly.
So tell me about how you came to the decision of doing this modular approach for the rule sets instead of having one definitive experience.
Yeah. So I mean, first, our whole goal with this is that I'm a forever game master, right? I have game mastered nonstop since I started playing, right? Because I was the only person, when people said, like, we don't know how to play, how do we do this? I said, I guess I'll figure it out. and then I figured it out, and then from there I just kept going. So I think it has been a goal from the beginning to always be open for new players. And I run games. I've run games for high school students. I've run games for 20 somethings, 30 somethings, and I've run games for senior citizens. In fact, tonight I have a game, my year-long campaign so far, at the senior center in my town with local senior citizens, because it's a good way for them to be able to play a game and stuff like that without having to move about too much. But in playing with them, I've realized a lot of the pitfalls that come with the other systems, where it takes an hour and a half to create a character, an actually meaningful character. It takes an hour and a half to create. It takes 4 or 5 sessions for them to even understand what Faerun is and Waterdeep. And if you bring them to if you're taking them on one of the adventures, like I was playing Tomb of Annihilation the other day, explaining all of the lore that goes into Tomb of Annihilation for D&D, it could fill up the whole session as just exposition. And people tend to understand cowboys right off the bat, and so we wanted the rules to stay that way. And at the same time, I wanted to really be entertaining for players who already knew those things and when we're comfortable with what a d20 is and what a turn-based combat system is. And so I was sitting and I was grappling with like, how do I write rules for really advanced combat things? Like one of the things we had is like, well, there's a difference if you're using the basic rules and you're doing mounted combat. It's just as if you're doing on foot combat. You're shooting from a horseback or you're shooting from foot. You're just shooting a gun. Who cares? Fire your gun. Let's move on. If you use the advanced rules, you start seeing those differences. That shooting from horseback is a lot harder, but you can move faster. You can trample people. You can drag them with your lasso, that kind of thing. And so I was grappling with how do I combine those two things and still let basic players or new players get the feeling of it. And then my editor, Rachel, she said, well, why not just make a set of advanced rules and a set of basic rules? And it all kind of clicked. And then I realized how much of the game could be that modular rule system. So that's where it came from. And really it came from wanting the rules to be simple all the time, but also wanting to give players that opportunity to like, yeah, I want to get a disease. I want to get tuberculosis partway through the game, but knowing that's really an advanced rule, having to grapple with that. So.
Yeah. I want to get tuberculosis is not a phrase you hear very often.
Not afraid. Yeah, that's true. Maybe not everybody's into that. That's the thing though, is that like I love, like, again, I'm going to talk about Tomb of Annihilation. There's that. I don't know if you've played that
Haven't had a
module.
chance. Soon.
Yeah, yeah, good. You should. It's a fun one. But there's a section that talks about all the diseases that are down in this area, and it's so fun. Like I think that's the best part of the game. But all of my players were like, no, that's too tough. Like I don't want my character to die. I think it's so cool if you know your character is going to die from a disease. So many new role play opportunities open up, right? You start being more reckless, and also you start caring about different things. Um, and so I wanted to include that in the game, but I knew that most players don't like that, so why force it upon them? And so, that's just one small example of the different advanced and basic rules that we've got.
Fair enough. So you mentioned some stuff about combat. Is this meant for
Yeah,
theater of the mind, or grids, or some funky system with zones?
yeah, no, it's definitely a theater of the mind. I am not. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of using miniatures because I think that those are a barrier to entry for a lot of people. That like, oh, I have to have a miniature to play. Then that's another $20 just for a gray unpainted one, and then we have to get this, and then we have to have a mat. Like, I want people to be able to sit down and play it. That being said, if you have miniatures and you definitely want to use them, go for it. The game is set up to be able to use them. Um, so we don't use a lot of specific numbers. I think the only specific numbers that we use are things like you can only run 20 feet if you spend your whole turn moving, and you can only throw a knife like up to 30 feet or something like that. But I also tell the game master in the game master section, like, don't worry too much about those numbers. If it's going to be cool that they throw the knife past their friend and it gets the baddie right, right as the climax of the battle is happening, let it happen. Don't worry about measuring out all those spaces. I know that there are people who like that wargaming side of it though. And I love my RTSs and my wargaming as well. So if you wanted to go for that really highly tactical combat, you can absolutely do that. And I've done that with my playtesters too. I've had groups who are like, yeah, no, let's draw this out. Let's figure out exactly how far away we are, and let's do it all on the mat. So it embraces both, but it's really built for the theater of the mind and just embracing that it's, a cowboy shootout.
Yeah, it's one of those things that for me is very dependent on genre, and
Yeah.
Wild West action does not quite seem like the genre for.
Right. Yeah, if
Yeah,
you're doing like mech warriors, it's like, yeah, that strikes me a lot more as like we need to know exactly how far people, or space combat. That's very much like a how far away are we from the bad guys. But I think cowboys, it's like they didn't measure anything. Why are you kind of? So that's my attitude.
yeah. All right, well that's quite excellent. Is there anything you want to bring up that I haven't quite gotten around to?
Um, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think about. Well, I'm looking at my own table of contents. Um, I think I've said it a couple of times, but this game is really, it embraces people who are new to the whole genre. If you don't know where to start with tabletop games and you want to start somewhere, this is not a bad choice. Um, it is it is designed for new game masters and new players to really get the ball rolling and find their sea legs before they go into playing D&D or playing Pathfinder or playing Star Wars or whatever other system you might want to play. And so it it might feel familiar to people who have played 5e. I think because that's the system I've played the most. So there will be some things like that looks a little familiar. Um, but it doesn't have that high bar for entry where you have to know all the rules and you have to know that it's firebolt and not fireball, and that a fireball has a 20-foot radius and stuff like that. It's like, no, just toss the dynamite. That's fine. It'll explode. I promise. You know, that's kind of the attitude that we've got with this game.
Yeah, more cinematic than simulationist, certainly.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have those friends who are interested in playing but aren't really sold on fantasy or sci-fi or something, you can have just a one shot in Mud, Blood, and Glory, or you can have a 10-week campaign or a year-long campaign, and set it up how you like. And the leveling system itself is milestone leveling, right? So it's not hard set on you have to earn this much experience. And so a game master can level up as quickly or as slowly and still be within the game's bounds, and it won't break. You won't feel too powerful or too weak at any point, which I think is also good for new game masters. I think giving them the flexibility for that, and the whole game master section is just like all of the tips and experience that I've had and that my game master friends have had through their years of experience. Like what do I wish I had known going into a game, and how could we make a game that supports that, and how could we tell people that right off the bat? So it's definitely for those people who are really looking to get into it but don't know where to start. It's the best way I can say it.
Cool. So I do have one more question for you.
Sure, yeah.
How did you get into tabletop gaming?
I was a senior in high school, or I was going to be a senior in high school, and my friend said, "Hey, let's play D&D," and I said, "Sure." My older brother had played it a bunch when I was way younger, but it was like him and his cool friends got to play it, and I got to sit and watch. And so we played like one or two sessions that summer, and then I just started getting into it, and then in college especially. um, we had that conversation where there's like probably 12 of us, a dozen or so, and someone's like, let's play D&D, and I said, yeah, I'd love to play D&D, and everyone's like, well, I don't know how to play. And so I sat down and just started, and it was that was right around when the fifth edition, like rumors of fifth edition were kind of starting. And so I don't know if that gives me a timestamp for how young I am. But it was right around that period, so we started kind of really getting into it, um, and then I've just been playing ever since then. But I've played plenty of fantasy games and stuff like that since very very early. I think the first game I ever played was like those really old like Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider games. I still have memories of like going down to like the my dad's office in our house and like playing and loading it up on floppy disks and stuff. So
Nice. Yeah.
yeah, those were the days.
Have you ever played the Indiana Jones tabletop RPG?
No, what's that?
I think the World of Indiana Jones is the one that doesn't suck.
Okay.
There was a previous one where there were no character creation rules or anything. It was just like play characters from the movies. Um,
Yeah.
it's ancient. It's really old. And
Wow.
I don't think they're very good, but they exist.
Yeah.
As is the way with most licensed games, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're kind of farmed out to folks who don't exactly know what they're doing with the content.
Most of the time, yeah. There's some
Yeah.
good ones. Trying to think of any.
I mean,
Star
I'd say the
Wars?
Star
Yeah.
Wars is frankly, yeah, no, that's the one I go to where it feels like it was really designed by folks who want to play that game. But again, that's one of those games where I sit down and I play with new players, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is why do I have to remember what these new symbols mean? Like knowing what a D12 is hard enough, let alone knowing what the symbols on that D12 mean. And it's I think that's a challenge. So that's again something we've tried to avoid in Mud, Blood, and Glory.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate that. Uh,
Yeah.
well, it's been great talking to you.
Sure. Yeah. I hope I provided enough content for a little video.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's a whole lot else to discuss. I mean, that's the thing is it's a small game for the lore is not hard to know. As soon as you sit down and play with people, they immediately put on their Western accent and say howdy, and it's like, yeah, that's great. I don't want to be giving you 300 pages of like when this intergalactic federation met that intergalactic federation and had a space war. I just want you to get playing, and so character creation takes 30 minutes at most, and you can get in and play with your friends really quickly. So.
Cool. Anything?
Yeah.
Any last words of wisdom or advice for prospective people running a Kickstarter or DMing a game or what have you?
Oh, running a Kickstarter DMing game. Well, I'll say the game mastering advice for that is just do it. I mean, it's one of those things that's like it feels really scary, but when they can't see behind the screen, like they don't know that you're making stuff up. They think you've got it all made, right? So you can just say like, "Oh yeah, that's Mason Westmoreland. He lives over there," and they're like, "Wow, he had that all planned." It's like, no, I didn't. I just have a name generator open in front of me. I think that's my biggest piece of advice is just like if you can do a straight face for long enough, you'll be a good game master eventually. And you just got to keep doing it, and it's really good to learn with new people because they don't know that you're not that great of a game master. Um, and anytime that's the other thing is that like being a successful game master just means if you show up with friends and hang out and have fun, I think you've been successful, right? Like that's what you have pizza, you drink a beer, you hang out with friends. Good job, you did it. Like that's a game well done. People for running a Kickstarter. I mean, it's interesting. The Kickstarter community is very not insular, but it's a very select group of people. Something that we weren't expecting as much is like I think traditional marketing and traditional outreach doesn't work as well for folks on Kickstarter. Most of our backers have come from people who are just browsing Kickstarter or heard of it through very specific Kickstarter related content. And so
Like me.
things, yeah, exactly. Right. So things like, having ads on Instagram or Facebook or Reddit or wherever you might have your advertising, um, may not work as effectively as a traditional game. Um, that's kind of our biggest learning point right now. I'm sure there's more to go. The campaign is still young.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
I hope that we can get you a couple more backers.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's been great. I really like how you're always reaching out to those, the younger developers, and hopefully I can send you some good news when we're successfully backed and everything. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I'm hoping so.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, thank you.
for all our viewers at home, have a good night, everybody.